Hello everyone, my name is Matthew and welcome back to my channel where we talk about all things computer science and software engineering. Now in this video I thought I would talk a little bit about what I believe are the top 3 kind of non-technical skills to have as a software engineer. And what I mean by non-technical skills are basically any skill that you need as a software engineer that is not basically writing good code per se, would be considered a non-technical skill. So let's get just straight into it. So the first kind of tip that I have, or the first most important skill for software engineers, in my opinion, is communication. Now, many people, especially people who are not inside the kind of software tech industry, believe like that, for some reason software engineers are just like in their parents' basements coding all day and they're super antisocial and things like that. But, you know, at least from what I heard from other software engineers, software engineering YouTubers years ago when I was little, or even now that I am in the industry of software engineering, I can say with 110% certainty that that is just simply not true. Communication is at the very least 50% of the job, and at lots of companies, it's up to communication is probably around 50% of the job, maybe a little bit less, a little bit more, depending on what company you're at, but it is a huge part of your job, is to communicate, either written, verbal, in meetings or through documentation or through Stack Overflow posts or through Stack Overflow answers. Like really, the community of developers around the world rely on amazing communication skills, and that is really what makes or breaks or just what makes or breaks a really good developer versus an amateur developer or a somewhat good developer. Now, that kind of really, that's the main first tip. Although when I say these second and third tips, keep in mind that all 3 of these tips are really equally as important, in my opinion. I would say communication is extremely important, but so are the other 2 tips I have. And that leads me into the second tip, which is just being able to copy and paste code. Now, as weird as that sounds, it is 100% truly just an amazing skill to have. And, that's for a variety of reasons, especially as a beginner and as a professional developer and even as a senior developer. Now, what I mean by this is oftentimes when you are working on a software project of some sort, if you want to build everything from scratch, then be my guest. But when I've worked on all my professional projects and even at my company and just on personal projects, like if you really wanted to build everything from scratch as a developer, you would never get anywhere. You would not be able to build anything half useful. Now, that means that oftentimes when I am starting, for example, a new kind of code project, I haven't initialized a React project with Create React App in forever. It's been like months and months, months and months if you've ever used React. And the reason for that is that creating a React project from scratch is really time consuming and inefficient. Whereas I've created my own template that I basically copy and paste for every new project. And it's really the same thing for a lot of mundane tasks. Like when you want to ask me to create an Angular module or an Angular component or even just a React component, I'm not going to know how to do that. And you may be thinking, what? You're like a full stack developer. Well, yes, I know full stack development. It's the same thing. Like if I wanted to set up a basic GraphQL API or a basic REST API, I don't know how to implement that on my own. I simply go to a previous project of mine or even a different kind of module, a different component on the same project, and I hit Control C, Control V. And I found that that's pretty much what almost all developers do. And the reason for that is one, it saves a ton of time. And it really allows you to hit your maximum productivity potential as a developer. Now, really the same thing when I am learning new technologies. Whenever I am learning a new programming language or learning a new programming framework, to take the time to manually write out all of the lines is only really practical, I'd say, when you are first learning. And that's, when you are literally learning the syntax itself, when you have never written a line or a line that looks like the one you're writing out. But really past that, when you want to implement a small feature or you want to implement, some bug fix and you found the solution, most often you can search up the error that you're getting or searching up the kind of thing you're trying to do, and you'll get a Stack Overflow link right there, and you click on it, and most often there's a code snippet that another developer has left to kind of illustrate how to really solve the problem that you're looking to find. And 9 times out of 10, the best thing to do is just highlight the entire snippet, Control C and Control V, and it gets you up and running, and it really keeps you, it gets you past the mundane part of just writing out the solution. If you understand the solution and you really, I mean, the only person you'd be cheating is yourself if you didn't understand it. Now, that's a whole different question. But if you understand the solution and you just had trouble coming up with it, which happens so often as a developer, then it is more than okay to copy and paste. And really, anyone who wants to, who disagrees, well, go to Clement Milescu, go to Mayuko Inuo, go to Google, their former Google engineers, Facebook engineers, go to the top, the cream of the crop engineers, and it's no different. Everyone copies and pastes, and it's a part of the job, and it's been a part of the job since the first day I started writing code, and it hasn't changed 4 years later. So yeah, that's kind of the second tip, is really just learn to copy and paste code. There's nothing wrong with it. And I've even had friends who are like, that's cheating. And I'm just saying, like, as a professional software engineer, it is like a good portion of your time writing code is simply copying and pasting it. Now, to move on to the third tip, it's somewhat related to this one, but not exactly, is to learn how to read documentation. And I guess, learn how to follow video tutorials if that's your thing, or like written tutorials, but documentation is so important. Now, as a software engineer, if you are a software engineer, you will know this right off the bat. Your company internal probably has a bunch of internal documentation. If you've ever worked with an API, it has a bunch of documentation, or a good API at least. And in software engineering, what documentation is documentation is basically a website, usually, a simple website that basically kind of explains every single thing a library of code does. So if I want to interface and make a bot, a chatbot for YouTube, for example, or a chatbot for Discord, if you know what Discord is, or a chatbot for Slack, or a chatbot for Twitter, then I would have to interact with something called an API. And depending on what I was making, if I wanted to make a Twitter bot, I would interact with the Twitter API. If I wanted to make a Discord bot, I would interact with the Discord API. And for every API, application programming interface, there is documentation on how to use it. Now, documentation, again, it explains, like, you want to do this. If you want to make your bot say something, you do this. If you want to make your bot listen to messages, you do this. And literally on the documentation, there is usually code snippets there. And that ties into the second tip. Like, you basically go on the documentation, and so often when I'm learning something new, I'll simply copy and paste from the documentation, from the official documentation made by whoever created the API. And it's very common and it's very effective. Now, that's a skill that I learned that a lot of junior and beginner developers just don't possess, is the ability to look through documentation and actually kind of understand it. Because really, nowadays, more and more kind of technologies are having tutorials created for them on YouTube, online, on Medium, Hacker Noon, any kind of blog, or, like YouTube, like I said, or Scrimba, different online tutorial platforms. But really, for the less documented APIs, if you're working on something a little bit more obscure, or even really, if you want to make something super custom, like let's say you wanted to make a Discord bot that is able to translate messages using the Google API and is able to do this and do that, well, using a YouTube tutorial, there is not really going to be a YouTube tutorial for that most often. So you'll actually have to go through the Discord.js documentation and read through it. And often you read the documentation and it tells you how to write your code to do what you want to do. So documentation reading and writing is really, really important, because documentation serves as the kind of universal medium of communication between developers. Like, yes, I'll communicate in meetings, I'll communicate through instant messaging with my team, but all the time, I'm working with code that was written by a developer across the world, in Sweden or in China. And I'm working with code that was written across the US, in New York, or even just, in another place in California, or even someone who wrote code here where I live in San Diego. But the point is it doesn't matter if we've never met. It doesn't matter if we've never communicated. Their documentation serves as a way for me to understand everything they were thinking when they were writing the code without ever having to talk to them. And generally, the same thing goes for, like, on documentation, or on like GitHub repositories. You can also often raise issues, or like basically say, if you found something wrong in the code, you can tell the developer. Like being able to write good issues is another communication skill. And notice that all of these skills, copy and pasting, or documentation, reading, and writing, all tie into communication. They all are a form of written communication most often. So, that kind of completes the entire hierarchy. So kind of to recap really quick, the first main tip that I would say for non-technical skills for software engineers would be a great communication skill. And the way you build this is really just by having experience. If you've ever worked on, if you like haven't ever done a professional software engineering job or position, then what you can do is you can work on a personal project with maybe a friend, or maybe go to some online hackathon or in-person hackathon when that's possible again, since the pandemic's currently happening, and just build a project with them. Like there are so many opportunities as a developer. You could even go to meetup.com, and there are so many meetups if you are in a city like San Diego has like 30 different code meetups that are all for different like topics. Some of them are specific to programming languages, some of them are general code meetups. You can meet up in person with other developers who are interested in the same thing as you, and you can learn to communicate and learn to kind of, build that skill of, communicating your thoughts and communicating your code and such, stuff like that. Now, the second tip, kind of as a recap, was just learn to copy and paste. First, the biggest thing is just get over the idea, if you do have it, that copy and pasting is somehow wrong, is somehow bad, because in software engineering, it is one of the most common actions you will do. And some software engineers even end up copying and pasting more code than they write. And is that wrong in any way? Well, it gets the application built, and the code was put online for a reason. I've answered Stack Overflow, and I've put code snippets in there. I put that code online so another developer who's looking for the answer can get it quickly. That's the point of the code being there, is so that you can copy and paste it. So, of course, learn to copy and paste, no stigma. And then the third final tip is pretty much just, why am I blanking here? Oh yeah, it's just learn to, read through documentation. Now, documentation, like I said, is the most common form of communication between one developer to another, especially if you don't directly work with them. They basically give you a window into what the developer was thinking for a certain API or a certain application or something like that. So if you want to see more videos like this, you can check out my Tech and Career playlist, which is linked in the description. I upload these kinds of videos every 4 days, and I do also upload a kind of tutorial style video for whatever I'm teaching at the moment every single day, and you can check that out on my channel. If you enjoyed the video, please consider giving it a thumbs up, subscribing to the bell icon for notifications whenever I post new videos. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.